Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Rise and Thrive with EHE Health. I'm Katie, a sports nutritionist, exercise physiologist, and health mentor at EHE. March is National Nutrition Month, so I'm super excited today to talk to you guys about the best ways to support our bodies as winter fades and we get ready for the warmer days ahead. But before we spring into our conversation today, I want to remind anyone with questions to just drop them in the comment box and we'll do our best at the end to answer all of them. So today we're joined by Laura Farrell, a registered dietitian based in LA. Welcome, Laura. Thanks so much for joining us.
Hey, everyone.
Why don't you tell us a bit about yourself?
Sure. So as you mentioned, I am a registered dietitian currently in LA, but I am actually from New York. So from upstate New York, if anyone is familiar with any of the cities up there. I completed my undergraduate degree in nutrition and dietetics from Cornell University, which is in Ithaca, New York. And then after I completed that, I matched to what's called a dietetic internship. So it's kind of like a residency program that you have to go through to become a dietitian. And the program I matched to was in New York City with Queens College. So after I finished my undergrad, I moved to New York, finished kind of all of my schooling down there. I had rotations kind of all over the city. I worked at Harlem Hospital. I worked at St. John's University with the athletes there. I worked in some private practices. And then I took my board exam and became a registered dietitian. And about 6 months ago, I got in a car and moved across the country to LA. And during the pandemic, I opened up my own virtual private practice, Laura Farrell Nutrition LLC. And I see everyone 100% virtual, even though I am based in LA. And I specialize in a couple different things, but mostly sport and performance nutrition, as well as recovery from eating disorders and disordered eating, and just kind of general overall like healthy well-being, nutrition coaching. So that's kind of a little overview of me and my education.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing. It's really great to have you. So I'd love to get started. I have a few topics to discuss today. First being, it feels like every other day, at least here in New York, it's either freezing and everyone is eating soup, or then the next day it's warm enough to finally get outside, get some exercise. As we transition into this warmer weather with spring, do you have any recommendations on how people can adapt their eating behaviors and maybe exercise routine under these current conditions?
Yeah. So first, I totally understand like living in New York for 3 years. I know like one day you step outside and you can be in a short and t-shirt, and then the next day you need like your whole parka and a scarf. So, and I am kind of one of those people, like you said, that like my eating is kind of influenced by the weather. So a couple different ways that you can kind of handle this like drastic changes. First, having just a variety of different options depending on what like your mood might be. So for those days where it's raining and cold, having, ideas of things around the house like soups or kind of other, like I like to make warm like grain bowls. Something I like to do to kind of help prepare for this, because obviously even though the weathermen try to predict the weather, I feel like they're always wrong. I like to like batch make soups and then freeze the leftovers. And then if I'm feeling like I want that for lunch, just kind of heating that up really quick instead of having to cook every single day, like kind of thinking ahead of like, what are some, big like ingredients or meals that I can make and then freeze and use for later. So, and then on the flip side, when the weather is finally warming up and maybe you start craving more cool things. So this is when I like to kind of include any of like the fresh fruits and veggies. I'm a huge smoothie bowl person in the morning. So what I like to do to kind of prep my smoothies is I cut up all of the kind of vegetables and fruits. So like frozen spinach, maybe some banana, berries, put it in like a little plastic baggie. And then all I have to do in the morning is like throw it in the NutriBullet or blender and then add whatever, like the almond milk or whatever else in there. So I'm all about kind of prepping ahead. And this is something that I always recommend to my clients as well. Like, you don't have to be so strict where you have the plan of like, on Monday, I have to have this meal at this time, because sometimes we don't want that, but at least having like some ingredients around the house and an idea of like, how can I use these depending on my mood?
Right. I love that. Like, meal prepping in easy, cutting up some fruit. It doesn't take hours in the kitchen. It doesn't need to be every night. You can do it like 2-3 times a week. Like hard boiled eggs in the fridge and like snacks like that you can have handy. What's your take on frozen fruit? I know you mentioned fresh, and then you also mentioned kind of freezing something. So what's your take on frozen fruit?
So frozen fruits and vegetables actually in themselves are more nutritious than the fresh. And the reason for that being is that when they're picked and frozen by the farmers or companies or whoever, it's picked at peak ripeness and then frozen right away. So they can actually have a higher nutrition content versus, say, like if I got an orange from Florida, it has to be packaged up and then get all the way to me in California. Well, I'm sure I could probably get like some oranges that are a bit closer than Florida. But so the nutrition content may actually be higher in terms of like the micronutrients in there. But obviously the toss up is the texture. Sometimes most people prefer it better with the fresh. But for my smoothies, like you're blending it all up. So that's why I'll get them fresh or buy frozen as well.
Awesome. I love that.
Yeah.
And what about some exercise ideas as we transition to the warmer weather?
Yeah. So I think, again, taking advantage, especially if you're in a colder climate, like on those nice days, to get outside if you can, even if it's just going for a walk or, going to a park, going for a run, if you're into all of that. And the reason why I emphasize going outside is to help you get some of the vitamin D, which I'm sure that many of us are lacking from following the winter months. So statistics show that actually 40% of Americans are deficient in vitamin D. And I see this all the time in my practice. Like, it's probably one of the most common things that people come in and their labs are like, oh yeah, my vitamin D is low. And like, the reason for that being is like, yes, we can get a little bit of it through food, like fatty fish, egg yolk, even like UV fortified mushrooms have it. But even if you're consuming all of that, sometimes it's just not enough. And if we're definitely not going outside, which most of us, A, it's the winter, B, the pandemic, aren't spending a lot of time outside, this deficiency is super common. So getting outside to exercise when you can to kind of get some of that. But I always like to say kind of like, test, don't guess when it comes to knowing your lab values. So the spring is a perfect time to go see your primary doctor, ask them to test your vitamin D levels and see if maybe you need a supplement or it's just another kind of indicator to get outside and spend some more time doing that. And then on the flip side of that, I know that, again, with the weather, it changes up. If you don't have time to do that, that's okay. Or if the weather doesn't permit, trying to figure out some way to get movement inside. So I've been a huge fan of doing like live kind of Zoom classes with my friends, like even across the country. Like, we'll both play the same like yoga video and do it at the same time. So whatever kind of things like that motivate you as well, but just, fitting in that movement, whatever way you can.
That's awesome. And I think, making sure you're moving every day, whatever that is. And if the weather is on your side, then absolutely get outside to get that vitamin D if possible.
For sure.
Awesome. So moving along, another topic that comes to mind, and I thought I'd bring up is actually an important organ, the liver. So I thought we might want to pay special attention to this as we move towards some of the lighter foods of spring. For those of you that don't know, the liver is in charge of constant renewal and cleansing of the body's toxins, hormones, nutrients, blood, and more. So there are many in-season foods of spring that would naturally support the liver. Do you have any recommendations on these foods?
Yeah, definitely. So I always, like to look at food as medicine in itself too. Like, it has so many, depending on the food, so many kind of different beneficial antioxidants, nutrients, things that can help support all of the function of our body, and liver function being one of that. So two things I did want to mention too before food is actually two drinks. So coffee in itself can increase the antioxidant levels in the liver, which helps to kind of reduce inflammation. And then green tea, I'm a huge green tea fan, is a really another great source of antioxidants. And there's been some research to show that consumption of it may improve blood markers of liver health, which is really cool. In terms of like seasonal kind of food, so fresh berries and cranberries, two things that I love, are high in an antioxidant called anthocyanins, which is another thing that kind of can help protect the liver from damage. And then a big one, which I think is probably the number one thing that people think about when they think of liver health, is cruciferous vegetables. So these are things like Brussels sprouts, broccoli, cauliflower, all of that kind of stuff. And then there's some research to suggest that these foods may increase levels of the detoxification enzymes, further helping the liver and preventing any damage that might go on in there. So those are kind of the main foods I would recommend. But for liver health, like 100%, the main thing is looking at alcohol consumption. So kind of moderating that and making sure, I know, especially just with the pandemic and everyone's been at home more. And I've had a lot of clients just saying that they've just been like drinking more at home because they don't have to get up and go to work the next day. So like being really mindful of that and making sure that like, that's not something that you're relying too heavily on.
Right. I love the green tea tip.
Yeah, I love green tea.
Yeah,
It's
so
one of my favorite things.
Yeah, so good to know. So that brings us really nicely to my next question or next topic here. This is actually a new acronym that I've never heard before, but I thought was really funny and sounds engaging. Cut the crap, C-R-A-P. And I thought this would actually be a nice, easy way for people to start kind of digging themselves out of the winter slump and begin making some better nutritional changes in a positive way. So cut the CRAP stands for coffee, refined sugar, alcohol, as you mentioned, and processed foods, which basically means eating more of real whole nutrient dense foods filled with antioxidants and just overall quality nutrition. So on that note, what would you say are the best strategies to reduce those not so favorable foods? I mean, especially given COVID and, stay-at-home orders and all that, and best practices towards like the healthier foods for spring.
Yeah, for sure. So I think when it comes to, thinking about your behaviors with these types of foods, and I also want to validate too that like, I know it's been a crazy tough couple of months. I've had a lot of clients that I've helped them navigate, their nutrition during these times. And what I really help them focus on first is like their mindset around health and nutrition and eating in general. So I always tell them, focus on what you can add in more than everything that you need to take away. Because sometimes when I tell them, oh, you can't have this, this, and this, then it just kind of feels like a negative experience versus like, how can we add in more of these like fresh whole foods, produce, all of that kind of stuff to make your meals more balanced. So, and also too, sometimes I know that if I tell people, don't have this, don't have that, just the thought in their mind of I can't have something makes them want it even more.
Sure.
So making sure too that like focusing kind of on that balance piece first. So if you feel like you're someone who your diet consists of a lot of these foods right now, first kind of start by swapping like the portions and aiming to make at least half your plate vegetables. So again, I don't think that's really an idea for breakfast, but more for lunch and dinner, like the portions on your plate, aiming half to get kind of the vegetables, the other quarter to do lean protein, and then the other quarter on the plate to be some sort of like starch or whole grain. And then for those specific kind of things that you mentioned, so starting with coffee, in itself, I don't necessarily think coffee is bad. I think when people rely on it too much, it can have some undesirable consequences like dehydration, shakiness. It can increase anxiety for some people. And I always like to ask my clients as well, I work with a lot of active people, like, if you need to rely on coffee that much, it's usually a sign that you probably need more sleep or you need to change something with your diet, like eating more kind of energizing foods. Right. So again, I have coffee in the morning, not saying you shouldn't have coffee. But if you're someone that's like, oh, they need 3, 4, 5, 6 cups to get through the day, then that's different. So, some kind of guidelines around that. I like to give myself like a cutoff time for caffeine as well. So like, sometimes it can, for some people, it's like as early as 12, I tell them to stop, especially if it's impacting your sleep at night. And 12 noon, I mean, not midnight. So giving yourself kind of that cutoff time so it's not impacting your sleep. And then also too, since coffee is something when it's consumed in excess that it can dehydrate you, making sure that before you even have your first sip of coffee, you're getting at least like 8 ounces of water in, because you just woke up, your body's already dehydrated. And then especially especially as we're going into these warmer months. And let's say you start moving outside more, you're going to be sweating more. It's really important to focus on that water intake first. And I always tell my clients the best way to monitor your hydration is by the color of your pee. So you want to aim to be kind of that like palish yellow all day. If it's darker than that, then you're dehydrated and you need to start sipping on some water. So that's something to consider. And then the next thing you had mentioned is so like processed sugars and that kind of stuff. So an easy sort of like swap for this is getting more natural sweetness from things like fruit. Like the more that you can still add, you know, that sweet flavor in your day, you may not crave the sugar as much. Another thing that I like to do, I feel like a lot of people going along with the coffee thing, people are putting like a lot of sugar and that kind of stuff in their coffee. So thinking of other kind of sweeteners you can add in there. I like to even just use like cinnamon. And another thing that comes to mind is adding like things like that into other foods as well. So like getting like a plain yogurt versus a sweetened yogurt and adding like your own fruit or cinnamon or something like that in there. So it's not saying like don't eat anything sweet at all, because then it's going to be 10 p.m. at night and you're going to be craving all the things, but figure out kind of which way, like how to add in more sweetness into your day in other ways. And then the next part of that was alcohol, which I touched on with when we were talking about liver health. So again, not saying don't drink alcohol, but like evaluating your own relationship with it, especially as, you know, has that changed over the last couple months since you've been at home? And what are some other ways that like you can still, you know, have fun with what you're drinking? Like I like to make mocktails sometimes with like kombucha or seltzers with different fruit, and, you know, figuring out when it makes sense to have something like that versus when you actually want to have a real cocktail. And when you're drinking as well, I always like to recommend that in between each drink, having a glass of water, so that, because when you're drinking alcohol, you're dehydrating yourself and you want to rehydrate yourself. So that's kind of the gist on alcohol. And then just for like processed foods in general, something I've been working with a lot of my clients is like helping them make their own snacks at home with like whole food ingredients. So doing things like rolled oat energy balls, where like you take some oats, you could add like some peanut butter, some chia seeds, something like that. And that's like a great snack for the afternoon. You could make your own trail mix, whatever else it may be. So it's kind of a mix of like having those whole foods on hand, but also like a little creativity in the kitchen can help. So, I know that's sort of like a whole big mouthful of a bunch of different things.
No, it's great. I love that you mentioned really the hydration. You tied that in so well with really both just drinking more and also how to replace with some other like bad behaviors or not favorable behaviors. You know, having a glass of water right before your coffee, I think is a really great strategy. You know, you can still have your coffee, but have a glass of water beforehand. And yeah, like maybe, you know, water down the alcohol or, you know, mix it with something else, you know, kombucha or a better quality mixer. Is definitely a good way to hydrate and a way to also reduce some of these, you know, not favorable foods.
Definitely. And I think, hydration is one of those things that like people don't, I think, realize like how much it plays a big role in just how you're feeling in general, like cognitive function. If you're exercising more, it's even more important. So it's probably one of like my favorite topics to talk about with people, even though it doesn't necessarily have to do with food, but obviously it has to do with health.
Yeah, it's just as important. Absolutely.
Definitely.
In terms of like a routine, would you recommend anything for people to kind of get into these habits?
Yeah. So I think, you know, anything that can kind of help with how you're starting your day in the morning and like setting those intentions in the morning of like how you want certain things to go. So I'll kind of explain what I've started to do for myself over the last couple of months. So what I kind of start my morning with is what I call the 3 M's. So this is movement, mindset, and then mindfulness. So the reason I like all these 3 things is, like I said, it gives me that minute in the morning instead of just waking up and being like, go do your work, go do this. It's like, no, I'm actually taking some time for myself and saying like, how do I want this day to go? So movement obviously is movement. It can mean exercise, but it doesn't have to mean a 60-minute HIIT class, because a lot of people don't have time for that in the morning. It can mean go take your dog outside around the block. It could mean doing a little bit of stretching, doing a 10-minute yoga video, just something to like kind of wake your body up. Mindset is, for me, is all about
water on the side.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. Mindset for me is all about journaling, and mindset can be whatever you want. For you, it could be reading, but I have a journal and I like to start my day with like gratitude. I'm also a very type A person. So I do like a little bit of time blocking and give myself kind of a list of like, here are the things I have to do. And being like an entrepreneur and working from home, it really helps me to set those boundaries where it's like, you're doing this from this time, because it is really easy working from home to just be like, oh, I'll just do that later. And then,
Right.
but then things don't get done. So that mindset piece, and then the mindfulness. So again, this can be different for each person. Maybe that means a short meditation, or for me, sometimes it just means that like I'm drinking my coffee and not checking my emails and going on Instagram, and I'm just being present in
Yeah.
that moment. So taking those kind of three things really helps so that, you know, I am connected to myself in the morning, and I just have already set that intention of like, you know, how my day is going to go. And I also find that doing that just kind of helps people focus on like their nutrition habits as
Mm-hmm.
well, versus like becoming, instead of like kind of starting the day reactive to whatever your boss said or something else, like you're doing something for just you in the morning, which is really
Right.
nice.
And these don't have to be long. Little
No,
snippets of, a short meditation, a short, take your dog out, which you probably have to do anyway,
exactly.
and it really sets the day up for success, when you can give yourself that time. And it sounds like it could be as short as, 30 minutes or less.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. I mean, yeah, sometimes all three of those things takes me like 15 minutes.
Wow.
Like it's a 5-minute movement, 5-minute journaling. And you know, you don't want to rush through things, but like I'd rather do that than not.
Not
Cause
doing it.
I get, yeah. And I think if you're someone that doesn't have a morning routine at all, maybe just starting with one of those things for a week and
Right.
feeling like seeing how that goes. Cause like I get, if you're not used to doing that, it's like, oh, great, here's 3 more things I have to do in the morning.
Right.
But starting small and realizing like, oh, this actually just makes my day so much better.
Yeah. And it didn't take that long. I can easily tack on, 2-minute meditation right after.
Definitely. There's this podcast I love called The Daily Shine, and it's like 5 to 10 minute like meditation. Sometimes it has like journal prompts in there, and like I'll
Oh,
just listen to
awesome.
that, and I love that.
That's great.
Yeah.
What a great recommendation. Which brings us to our last kind of question topic here. Um, what would you say are your favorite seasonal spring produce, and what are some ways that our viewers can incorporate them into their meals, snacks?
Yeah. So I love eating seasonal, shopping seasonal if you can. I think depending on where you live, I know we have like farmers markets sort of all the time around here, but like going there and like picking up some fresh ingredients, and like the food just tastes so much better, and it's a little bit cheaper because you're getting it in season.
Right.
So some of my favorite spring food. So a lot of the like leafy greens are spring food. So like arugula, spinach, kale, those are all staples that I use in my salads, but also in my breakfast as well. So like I'll put frozen spinach in my smoothie. I'll saute up some kale with eggs, and it's just an easy way to get veggies in the morning, which I know is like a struggle for a lot of people. So thinking of other ways that you can add them in besides just like the obvious salad. For fruit, I really, really love cherries. So just having them as a snack around the house, or if you buy them frozen, the pit is like already removed, putting them in a smoothie with like a chocolate protein powder and some milk is so good for like a post-workout smoothie shake.
Love it.
Yeah. And then the last thing is asparagus. So I always think of this as like what I ate for Easter. So I always think of it as a very spring food,
Yeah.
but like roasting that with olive oil, salt, pepper, and then like a little bit of Parmesan cheese. And it's so good.
My mouth is watering.
I know. It's only 10:30 here, and I'm
I
like, oh, I
know.
want asparagus.
It's not dinner time for me yet, but I want it all. This is awesome. Doesn't look like we have any questions from our viewers right now, but hey, Laura, do you have any final words for everyone, and where can they find you?
Sure. So I think final words would just be start small with your nutrition and health goals. So like how I was kind of talking about before, work on adding in like one new healthy habit at a time. Because if we say, I have to exercise, I have to do my water, I have to eat my veggies, I have to do all this, then it's overwhelming and none of it happens. So like pick one thing a week and be like, oh, I'm really focusing on my water intake this week. And then it kind of helps so that over time, things actually become a habit, and it becomes, you know, just part of your lifestyle to include some of these things into your daily life. So yeah, Thank you guys so much for having me. It's been so much fun. And if any of the viewers wanted to chat with me more, had like follow-up questions, you can find me on my website, which is just laurafarrellnutrition.com, or I'm very active on Instagram at nutrition with Laura. So kind of simple there, but yeah.
Laura, that was awesome. I love what you just said about really, yeah, it's true from what I see in my practice as well. People are much more willing to add things in. And I think that's a really great way to start. You don't have to be taking things out. And you provided so many great sustainable behavior strategies to just begin incorporating that make a long, standing improvement to people's lives. So this is so great. It was so nice having you today. Thank you for joining us. Thank you everyone for joining in as viewers. And don't forget to tune back next week again for another episode of Rise and Thrive. Be well,
Thank
everyone.
you so much. Bye.
Bye, Laura. Take care.